Welcome back to another episode of the Career Bold podcast. And today we have one of our absolute superstar powerhouse clients that honestly, when he came to me, Ernie was already at the top of the top. He was working with the C-suite at J&J, Johnson and Johnson, obviously a mega company. And it's like, where do you even go from there when you've already reached that kind of pinnacle? So I wanted to bring him to the table to share his story. And of course, had to bring Ryan Meinberg because had a front row seat guiding him through this. And just really share really how this whole journey evolved and how you were thinking through it to advise others who are like you, Ernie, that are at the top of their career and they're like, where do I even go right now? So thank you for sharing your story.
Well, Olivia, it's great to be here, and you're right about the pivotal role Ryan had has had with me over the last year. It's really been fantastic, and he's kept me grounded and level-headed and let me vent when I needed to vent and pick me up when I needed to be picked back up. And I'm just thankful for what you've created here and the whole community because it's really helped me get through the summer. And I think, I've had this unique opportunity also, I think, to help and touch a lot of people in the community as well. So it's been a really rewarding process.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if you could kind of walk us back to when we met and you were transitioning out of your role that you had for so long and you were really a huge part of that strategy in the C-suite at one of the largest companies in the world, right? What was going through your mind? Like, I mean, technically you could retire, you didn't need to work, like, but you still had this drive, you were still hungry and it's like, where do you even go? Because, like, the way you think about your career at that stage, it's not like the normal person that has to pay the bills, it's a different mindset, right?
Exactly. I was 20 years at Johnson and Johnson in a very senior roles, multiple. And the world had changed. The pandemic took a lot out of me. I was exhausted. I was also inside the company being developed for future roles. And that was exciting too. But the company had changed. The world had changed. I put some boundaries in place for the first time in my life. It was learning I had through the pandemic. And the options that were presented to me to continue to working at Johnson and Johnson just didn't feel right for me. And there was a third option, which was I could retire from the corporation. That didn't mean I was going to retire from work, but I could retire from the corporation. And that unto itself was incredibly freeing and liberating and exciting. So when I did that initially, I took some time off. And I would encourage everybody to take some time off. I traveled, I played golf, I did all these things, right? But when I started getting serious about job searching about 4 months after my last day at the company, I started getting interviews pretty easily, actually, which is what I thought. And I put some principles in place. I wasn't going to move across the world. I didn't really even want to move across the country. My boys are still, I have two sons, are still in college here on the East Coast. And I didn't want to be too far from them because they still kind of need their parents. And one plays football, and I like to go to his games. And in fact, he just played last weekend. We had 20 members of our family there for the game. And that means a lot to me. So why would I give that up for any reason, for anything, right? So I knew financially I was in a good place. And you're right. I wanted the challenge of going back and having another job because, look, I learned so much. And just having 4 months of not being in the fray and talking to leaders like yourself and Ryan and others in this community, I had a new clarity. And just kind of said to myself, it would be really good to go back in a place where I don't have a prior history. I could start kind of new, bring a new perspective. And from many of the interviews that I went on, it was very exciting. I got to be honest, it was really, really, really exciting. I think that a couple of times I came up against this wall of would I be willing to compromise my parameters for the job? And I found myself coming back to no. And we can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, so I'm gonna toss this to Ryan because I know it's been like a roller coaster with this crazy market
Sure.
and just navigating it. And I think that you have the foresight, but also the wisdom to know kind of what's going on. But what did you guys see during the process that shocked you?
I'm gonna take lead on that one. I just had to confirm. Curry ball has the four phases, right? The four phases that are very pivotal. Each client obviously spends this some time in one phase or another, but for Ernie and I, it was definitely phases 1 and 2. The network was strong, the path was strong, but the key was one, that the self-limiting beliefs, because you're finding yourself in a new part of life, which is very different. So understanding what the market's going to teach us is one thing, but then once we got to the market validation, we really got educated. And we got educated quickly, but it was good. In fact, it was really good because we were being able to understand, what does a senior from a company like J&J after 20, 30 years in that area look like on the market today? What's companies looking for in that leader, and what are they willing to pay for, and everything along those lines? And throughout the journey, I think the clarity just got more and more obvious of what this looks like for Ernie, but not necessarily anybody else, just for Ernie. And that's what the most powerful part was. As companies were, let's be honest, they were chasing Ernie. They were really chasing you. And we didn't expect that. There's a couple things we didn't expect. So I wanted to lead that up a little bit early and give it to yourself to really elaborate. But that was the most powerful part.
I wasn't necessarily looking for a promotion in this next phase. In fact, I wanted to go a little bit back to my roots, right? If musicians can do that and go back to their roots early in their recording history, why can't a senior executive go back, roll up their sleeves, and dive right in? And that's what I thought I would do. And just bring all my wisdom and experience to a role that was maybe the number 2 or the number 3 person in the hierarchy and not necessarily the leader. I thought it would be really easy for me to fit right in. But as Ryan said, we learned a lot through that process about why that doesn't necessarily work in today's work environments, right? It can be perceived as threatening to some leaders to have someone who's really been down all these roads, even though I intellectually knew, right, there's no threat from me. I'm going to come in and just make the senior person look even better because I'm going to deliver at a really high level and not be trying to compete for that next level job. I think the learning, though, was the observations from other senior leaders could make perhaps those people who would be potentially hiring me uncomfortable. So,
Absolutely, because you've done their job, right? And so that's what everybody tells me. They're like, Olivia, they keep telling me I'm overqualified. And I'm sure you got that over and over again, right?
right. Right. I got, hey, 2 or 3 interviews in on a senior director level role, which would have been great for me. But then pivoting midway through it and saying, you know what, we have an SVP job that you'd be better for. However, it's not in your immediate proximity. You need to move to Europe or you need to move across the country. Again, coming up against my barriers that I had set for myself of saying, well, I'd be quite happy actually in this role that I applied for. I don't necessarily need to do that. And that was not taken well because look, these companies want to hire leaders. They have frameworks, right? They want to bring in an executive level person who they can see developing. And even though tenures in corporations are not 7, 10, 15 years anymore,
Mhm.
the structures are still kind of set up like that. They want to bring in someone that they can coach. That's just how they work, right? And so I was presenting as a little bit out of their box, which I think made it hard for me to fit in.
And I think a couple things to kind of double down on that even more for yourself, Ernie, is what we learned is, while there's wonderful companies and big organizations out there that you can really serve and add value to, there is more power for you in creating the value versus just offering the value. And there's a very big difference there. 'Cause when a company has a need, and of course you use the doctor framework, you go directly and you solve the problem, you create relevance, absolutely. But then what we learned is the fact that it may be easier that for Ernie to fit into a box that matches with his personal and professional life. If that box doesn't exist, then we create the box.
Great.
And I think that's what you did absolutely perfectly. So it's like if I have demands as a senior leader of where I'm at, your boys are playing football, and by the way, his boys know how to play football. Let's put that out there. Right? The boys are playing ball. You want to be attentive out there in Boston. You're close to New Jersey. You have these restrictions that where you're at in life is more important than the career because of where you're at in life, and you need a box that maybe a company can't offer. Well, then what you were able to do because of your experience in Vice Path, create my own box, and this is how we're going to do this. And so then you kind of go into more of a consulting type role by leveraging what you offer to an organization and putting demands that are necessarily that's best for the business, but also best for yourself to create what it is that makes sense for you now. And so the thing I'd like to talk to you about is what do you feel really helped get you to that part of the decision making process, and then how'd you go about it?
When I started, I was very nervous about tapping my own network, but I was inspired by the model here. And so when I started going through the trainings, I started just feeling emboldened. And for 2 months, I was sending 7 or 8 notes a day to 4 days a week to people that I know, creating opportunities, right? And just having discussions, right? And that was a product of the process. And I still have my list. I keep it here on my right hand side all the time that I wrote down about, my strengths and what I'm great at and my inspirational chart, as I like to call it. But I was really reaching out to lots of people all the time. And that got me a couple of consulting roles. And so, so over the summer through the fall, I was working, some weeks I was working 10 hours, some weeks I was working 50 hours. Just a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago now, I was asked to, I was pulled in to work on a massive M&A that really shocked Wall Street. But it was kind of last minute. It was my former boss said, "Hey, look, I really need somebody with your expertise. Can you jump in here?" And I worked with her for probably about 50 or 60 hours over a 4-day period and helped her knock out this massive, super confidential M&A. And that was super exciting, right? So what I did was I kept myself fresh through some of these consulting projects. And then I had the flexibility to pivot when a big assignment came in. I could jump on it, right? But also in the consulting process, I was advising 2 different consulting firms. I have a lot of expertise in that because before I went to J&J, I was a partner at a consulting firm that we built and sold. So I have a history on that side too. So I was, and plus I ran at J&J a $30 million budget with oversight for multiple consulting firms that advised us. So I really know from the other side, from the client side, what works and doesn't work at PR agencies today. So I was advising a couple of PR firms.
That's
I got
awesome.
uncomfortable when they asked me to come in as SVP into their firms because I didn't want to do the hard sell service work that they really needed in order to bring me in. I would have been happy, coming back full circle to what I said earlier, I would have been happy to come in as a senior strategist, doing the roll up your sleeves, nuts and bolts.
Mhm.
But they didn't want to hire me for that. They wanted to hire me to come in and be 100% about sales and growth.
Okay.
Not so interesting to me. Again, so I put my parameters in place and I said, well, I'd come in for this, but I don't want to come in for that. I could do a little bit of that, but I would rather have the majority of my time, 70% on the service side, not necessarily on the sales side, which they wanted to reverse, probably even more 90-10. So, I turned a couple of those things down. And now today, um, I'm spending a lot of time lecturing at universities.
Oh,
I'm
cool.
thinking about, I always had a dream to be Professor Knewitz, and I think I'm going to do that.
That's fun.
And I think I'm really going to take that on
You get to
and
help the youth.
help the youth. And when I left J&J, right before I left J&J, I established 2 scholarships at my alma mater, Seton Hall. One is to help minority students studying communications succeed. So there's funding.
Wow, that's awesome.
So there's funding for that. And then another one is to really reward students who are at the top of the game, who are maybe dual majors, studying business and communications, for instance. Really top students, in the top 1%, but to inspire them to, rather than go to Wall Street, go into the field of communications. So I created a scholarship for that too. So
Well, I
I've
wanna
always wanted,
actually I wanna ask you a really hard-hitting question about communications right now, because when you came to me, you were really worried about the field and your colleagues are freaking out, right? Because
yeah,
I mean, sadly, a lot of the perception in some of these organizations is it's a soft skill, so it's like they're discounting the value. You have that presence, that intensity, that strategy. The value for you is beyond the average comms leader, right? So how did you how do you overcome that and, stay optimistic about the field with
yeah.
what you're seeing?
And for everybody in communications on this, watching us today, I'm never ever more convinced. I've never been more convinced than right now that comms is so important. You're seeing it, right? In fact, the roles are expanding. A lot of corporations are putting HR responsibility under communications. They're also putting
Oh,
a lot of
wow.
they're putting a lot of operational responsibility under the communication, so they're bundling it.
Interesting.
So because executives know, senior most executives know that if their message is not being heard by the employee base, as well as by the investor base, as well as by the world base, that they're not effective.
Mhm.
So communications is actually never been so important. It is also true that deeper down in the organizations, are they cutting funding for public relations and communications? Yes. Are they cutting funding for other aspects of PR? Yes. Per headcount? Yes. All that is true. But at the senior most levels, responsibility is actually increasing and expectations are increasing. So I on when today's Wednesday. On Mondays and Wednesdays, I take AI for senior leaders, a class a class that I take online, just to keep my skills sharp and really make sure that I'm still learning and staying abreast of the latest trends. And everybody has to do that.
Yeah.
Too long in the reason communications became recognized as soft is because it couldn't speak the same way the VP or SVP of marketing could. That's the expectation now.
Speaking P&L, right? Or
P&L,
numbers.
market trends, future oriented, having a real pulse on the culture, all these things that were associated with other leadership roles were are now expected of comms leaders. So if you can't speak that way or don't understand those metrics, you're gonna be lost.
Mhm.
You just will be.
So I know, Ryan, like, do you have any questions? Because I keep thinking about really the market and getting your advice and how you can advise those that, are in comms right now and or even just like leaders who are being perceived as perhaps soft skills slash irrelevant. I think those are having the harder time right now than the hard skills like ops tech, like, the creatives are getting hit hard right now, and so as you think about AI, because everybody's using AI for communications and emails, and so what's your take on all this? On AI, you doing all the communication?
Everybody needs AI,
Yeah.
but everybody also needs RI, and RI is real intelligence. So the AI can spark creative ideas, give you a basis, but the real intelligence takes that as a starting point and then creates access or sparks a new, bigger idea that's on message or that drives the key insight to purposefully increase sales or drive brand awareness or grow reputation. So I'm speaking at an industry conference later this week about exactly this topic. But I believe the AI for the AI can only get you so far. The real intelligence is what takes it further. And that's actually what's been lacking. So if you're in a consulting firm and you're seeing your budgets are being slashed by 30, 40%, how do you make that up? How do you make that up? Procurement teams are just looking at numbers. They don't understand the value that's really being brought because they don't deal with it day to day. And sometimes in-house teams aren't good enough to explain the value these agencies bring. A lot of that's for self-preservation purposes, but they aren't really explaining it well, right? So if you're on the agency side as a comms leader or internally even, right, and you're fighting to keep your budgets and keep your teams intact and to keep your agency team intact with you, right? You should be making the case and have expectations as well of your agencies to bring big, insightful ideas beyond the day-to-day that are going to help elevate your strategies and execution to higher levels. It's there. No one's going to really say no to that if it's really going to bring the ROI. And that comes back to what we said, right? You need to understand the business terms in order to even have that kind of thought.
Absolutely. Well, I know I want to hear about this transition a little bit more, like what's going on, what sparked this idea? How did you guys come down this path? Did you come up with this idea or what led you to the ultimate, where you're at now? Could you share that story?
Yeah. I mean, Ryan and I probably were talking 2 or 3 times a week. And when we weren't talking, we were texting back and forth about it, right?
Nice.
And because it's a process.
Yeah.
It's a process.
It's a big decision.
It's a big decision. And and just being really humble about it, right? There was a grieving process I had to go through to say, you know what? It's okay. It's okay to separate yourself and recognize that perhaps the future is not working 7 to 7 in a corporate office all the time anymore. Now, look, right? The hard part for me is missing that dynamic of being in the energy of being in an office and being part of a team that's kind of rolling forward, all that kind of stuff. Because when you consult, it is you.
Yeah.
You guys know that better than anybody.
Yeah.
So I did have to go through a little bit of acceptance of that.
Mhm.
And I'm probably still going through a little bit of that, right? Because it is a little bit frightening. You put yourself out there, you're asking your friends and connections and colleagues to basically pay you to work for them, right? That's really how it starts. And you have to get past that, right? Because you have to remember the value you bring and the process that your seminars take everybody through the journey helps you appreciate that. I was lost on that. I was lost on that back in the summer. Until I really did those trainings, I would have spiraled probably without that. But it gave me some renewed confidence to accept that that's what it is. And it's an acceptance. And it's a process. I mean, I worked, for 35 years in corporate settings. So to move like this is a big deal. But what was the alternative? Sitting around the house, having 3 meals a day with your spouse, not necessarily so healthy. Yeah, right? But because you need other interests. So I'm doing a bunch of things. So I'm consulting, some weeks, like I said, it's really 20, 30, 50 hours. Some weeks it's 5, right? I go to the gym religiously, right? 3 or 4 times a week. I'm taking retraining classes, right? Earlier in the year, I took an accounting class and a finance class. Right now I'm taking an AI class. I'm lecturing at different universities. I'm on 2 different nonprofit boards. I spend a
Nice.
lot of time with this community in consulting back and forth conversations, right? I find those to be so inspirational. And I get so much joy out of that my phone blows up. I get tons of messages. I'm speaking at industry conferences. I'm really making sure, and this is really important. I'm talking to all my biggest industry contacts. I specialize in earned media, so working with reporters. I make sure I loop to them on a regular basis. So if they write an article, I send them a note. Or if I'm just thinking about something creatively, even if I'm not representing somebody, I share the ideas with them. I go to lunch with reporters all the time. just to keep it fresh so that when I need to pick up the phone, like these consulting things that kind of pop up for big, for big M&As or big, I actually have constant contact with them and I can slide right in, right? I know what they're working on. I can see how this fits. So I'm keeping myself fresh as I think about, 26 and 27 and 28. I do think I'll pivot to hopefully more stasis on the consulting side, have it be more regular. And I'll pair that with most likely being a college professor. That doesn't mean that if a job came along that knocks me off out of my shoes, that I wouldn't entertain that, because I probably would. But right now, this is my plan. Continue to consult, continue to grow that to a good level so that I'm not stressed out, but engaged actively in providing good value, while also giving back on the teaching side without compromising my time to be able to go to the gym, be able to play some golf when I want to, or go to my son's games on the weekends.
That's awesome.
That's the plan.
That's like beyond powerful. And I think the thing that you also did so well, Ernie, is the fact that as you mentioned going through the grieving process, which is human and it's natural. You can grieve anything that you're emotionally connected to, right? Anything that you're emotionally connected to. But I think we saw the entire process as an education. Similar as you go back to teaching into the college world, it's like when you're learning, it's an old Kobe Bryant quote. When you're learning, the world is your library. And from that standpoint is the fact that when things go a different direction that we didn't expect, from maybe being overqualified or maybe positioning you for a role that just does not fit with what your personal life is at this point in time, that's an education. It's not a rejection. That's not a pivot. It's a learning to be able to see where you fit and what exists for you now. And I think you did a really, really good job on that. We talked that out a lot, because like, what did we learn here? Because hang on a second, the value is strong, but value also has to be reciprocated based on what the organizational needs are. And we've talked about it too, is being overqualified is one thing, or they just don't want to pay for all of the value you can bring. And you can't control budgets. Like you just can't. If they're looking to cut 30-40% and they know, and to keep you, they're gonna have to pay X amount of dollars that they can't afford. No way. It's not a company that doesn't want that value. It's just a company that can't afford that value at this time. And that's okay. So this journey was fun, and I'm so excited just for you, and to continue to work with you, and see what next year holds, because it's going to be a great year for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I'm really excited about it. I really am looking forward to this version. I'll say this. I laugh a lot more. I read a lot more. I go to galleries and look and appreciate art. Um,
Sounds like you have a much more full life to me.
I'm much more full life. I have deeper friendships,
Mhm.
and because I have more time to focus on these things. And my son came home. It was my wife's birthday on Sunday. And my son, who we always go to his football games, so we're always traveling up to see him, but it's only an hour and a half away. He said, I really want to come down for mom's birthday. Let's make it a surprise. And he showed up at 5:30 on Sunday. And it was really great. It was really great. And I just feel more complete now.
That's amazing. And I think what I've just seen since, when I first met you, your whole definition of success has completely evolved, and you're more focused on alignment with what your values are, and less on titles and, status, because you're in a different mindset. You're not chasing that validation anymore. And it's just so powerful to get to create from a more free place. So I think you're just on to something here, because that's what we're all about. It's like at the end of the day, you get used to the paycheck really quick, right?
Sure.
And it doesn't really move you.
Right. Right. I mean, at this point in my life, right? I think if I were 20 years ago, I'd be in a different place. But I probably would have been hired by now if I were 20 years younger.
But 20 years ago, you'd have taken some of those location opportunities probably.
Yeah, 100%, right? 100%. But it's really about knowing what you are and what you want to be. And if I didn't put those parameters in place, I could have easily said to my wife, because I've done this before when I was climbing the ladder, right? I had jobs where I moved to California by myself, even though I had a wife and kids still in New Jersey. but I went and lived in California for 18 months, right? I wasn't doing that again. Just didn't want to do that again. I could have, and she would have understood because she's great, but yeah, right?
And we're talking about getting an apartment. We're like, oh, that's
Apartment. There was another job I was looking at up in Boston.
to get an apartment.
I have a son who got a job at Ernst & Young, and he's going to be in Boston. So I was like, this is a win-win. And I was convincing myself and convincing my wife that this would be a good thing. So I'm going to take this job in Boston. I'm going to get an apartment. My son could use the apartment as well, so he would save a lot of money. But you know what? When you find yourself explaining things like this that totally disrupt your core, would it have worked? Probably. But you know what? I feel a lot better that I ended up not doing that.
So absolutely, Olivia, he said it best. There's nothing more for me to add from that.
I wanna ask you one parting word, just,
Yeah.
this is a tough market. I've been doing this a decade. This is the toughest market I've ever seen. So, like, you've been in it, you've been gritty and making things happen, building a pipeline, turning down offers, like, you know, somebody that feels like they're just at ground zero right now, entering, maybe just got laid off and they're entering this market and they're just like, "Oh my God." What advice would you give them?
The first thing would be to breathe. And I mean that sincerely, right? Because if you've just lost your job, I think over 1 million people have lost their jobs this year. If you've just lost your job and you're starting over, I would say give yourself 30, 45 days to breathe, because it
I
matters.
love that.
And you need to take a step back and get out of the friction that you were just in. And I really think that's important. I'm not saying take a year off, right? I took 3 or 4 months off before I decided to jump back in, but I could. And I know not everybody has the means to do that, but I think you need some time to kind of get over where you were and accept what happened, appreciate yourself, and then move forward. Because if you don't do that, you might find yourself in a worse situation. So I think that's the first thing. And I think secondly, right, there's no shame in picking up the phone and calling your contacts and saying, "Hey, do you know anything?" Because that really, that really helps create connection, and people want to help. So
Mhm.
people are genuinely kind and they want to help you, right? So don't be afraid of that. And the Wall Street Journal actually said, there was an article about this. People who you're connected to on LinkedIn, even if you're not personally connected, if you have something in common, you should reach out, because those people want to help you too. And I think that's true. Um, I really think that's true. And people are more responsive now than they used to be, because I think people are more sympathetic than they used to be. So I think that's all in there. Um, and I would also say, I just said this to someone. She was 28 years old and she lost her job, but she had been at her company since graduating. So she'd been at her company 6 years or 7 years. And I said, go online, take a bunch of classes on LinkedIn, from LinkedIn Learning or from Stanford Online. There's all kinds of free classes you can take, right? So she took a bunch of them, and it took her 45 days. She got through all these trainings, got all these certifications, and she had 3 offers
Nice.
and was able to pick her spot. But she said those learnings helped, because it helped her pivot. So she got out of the field she was initially in, evolved, and got a job in a slightly different part of the corporation than she might have otherwise worked in. So she made herself valuable in a different way. And her combined experiences made her stand out in the interview process. And I thought that was great.
That's phenomenal, and thank you for the advice. Just breathe. I mean, I know when you're in that fight or flight, you just wanna get a job, let me secure my safety, right? And you just make that reactive decision, and it can totally derail your career, so I'm glad you got to the space where you gave yourself that grace and breathing, so you can get to the ultimate alignment of, "Hey, here's where I'm at in my life and what's most important, and I'm not gonna sacrifice that." So that congratulations.
Thank you. Life really is short. And it's really kind of hit me, right? Life's really short. And there's only certain things you get a chance to do in a certain period of time, whether that's personal, physical, or emotional connection with your wife or your kids, right? Like those moments are fleeting.
Yeah.
So if you actually have a chance to spend some time connecting there, your thoughts will be more clear, and you'll feel better about the next decision you make, because I never really set those boundaries. And now I can't believe I would ever do something that was outside the boundaries I've set. That's my learning takeaway from this process.
Well, thank you for making the time, and
Mhm.
seriously, you are a huge value add to our community, so we're really grateful to have you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for what you do.